so it is helpful to us to have kind of a record of this that folks can access when that question actually comes up. Over my time on land use in District 10, variances have been the topic of some of our most hotly debated neighborhood issues when we have development in the neighborhood. And sometimes those are small variance requests, sometimes they're really large variance requests. And I think I can say with certainty that no one cares about variances until they need one or somebody next door to them is trying to get one. And then they care a lot. And so anticipating people's future questions about variances when it impacts them, we had asked DSI to send us a resident expert to talk a little bit about some of those like common property related variances that homeowners might run into over the years that they own their home, and just give people a starting point on some of those resources. So with that, David, I'm going to turn it over to you.
All right, thank you. I don't know if you do I have an ability to share, because I do have a slideshow and I don't know what the level of, I mean, this is the land use committee, so you might be a little higher level than like an average resident, but I don't know what the background is. So the slideshow kind of talks about zoning, and I don't know how familiar you are with zoning to start.
I think we want to assume that this video, like this recording, is going to be accessed by people who might be starting kind of at the base.
Okay.
And so I would just encourage you to share, if you were taking somebody from the beginning, to share what that might look like.
Okay. So first of all, David Eide, DSI zoning. There are two zoning offices in St. Paul. One is over at Planning and Economic Development, and that would be where if you wanted to try to rezone a property or get a conditional use permit, change of a non-conforming use permit, split a lot. Those are the types of things that you would apply for at PED, and they have planners over there. I'm over at DSI at 375 Jackson Street, and I sit next to the building permit section. So I think they years ago DSI was created. I think they put us over here so we're close to them. So if they have questions, we can answer regarding like day-to-day zoning permitting. So I work under the zoning administrator. I guess to get into zoning, zoning is a system of land use regulation based upon text and map zones that separate land uses from one another. There are lists of uses that are allowed in particular zones, and we have tables with the dimensional standards, and there's setbacks for different for the building or there are landscaping requirements, etc. It's a tool to ensure that new developments are consistent with the comprehensive plan and meet standards compatible with the intended character of the community. Each city has its own zoning code, and St. Paul zoning code has been in effect since 1922. And in 1975, St. Paul adopted a new zoning code, which is the current one, although it's had many, many changes since then. And state law gives cities zoning authority and sets limits on that authority. And the state law also requires that we make a decision within 60 days of an application, or it is automatically granted. So you might hear the city council at, we haven't had very many zoning variances that ended up in front of city council, but even conditional use permits or whatnot, you might hear Council President Brenmone or someone say, how are we doing on the clock? Just because if we don't deny it or approve it within 60 days, it automatically is approved if it is theoretically approvable. Some general information, lots developed legally prior to today's zoning code that do not conform, or anything that was developed prior to 1975, it's considered legally non-conforming. And if it's a use, they could apply for a change of a non-conforming use permit from the Planning Commission. There are many different zoning districts in St. Paul. It's Euclidean zoning. So we have the residential districts, the T districts. We have special districts like VP, vehicular parking, or planned developments, business districts, OS, B1, BC, B2 through B5. And I think I'm sitting in a B4, B5 zone right now. I think Como Park's probably mostly zoned residential. Industrial districts, IT through I3, and then now the newer ones are the 4 districts, F1 through F6.
And I did just in the chat, I added a link to the zoning map, like the interactive zoning map for the city of St. Paul, if people want to be looking at that as we kind of talk about this.
Yes, that's excellent. That's a good point, is that all this information is available on the internet for folks to look at. It's not a secret. The city code's not a secret. You can go to stpaul.gov/code to find all of this information. And then the map is for each district. One section of the city that you might, I know this is not in District 10's area, but if you look at the capital area and click on that area, you'll notice that it says capital or CAAPB. There is a state office that controls the zoning for that area, so that folks still need to get a building permit from DSI and all trade permits, but they would go through the all the zoning regulations are handled by the state, and there's a separate office in that area. So we have the use charts, which are at stpaul.gov/code. Most likely, I don't know if we're gearing this more towards like homeowners, but you're probably in an R district. Those might be changing. There's the 1 to 4 unit study going on right now. But if you go and search like R4, you can search to see the table of uses, and then below it's the dimensional standards table. The zoning standards that we have minimum lot area, the density of dwelling units, floor area ratio. That's more common in like the T districts. And that's just the size of the building compared to the size of the lot or the land area on the lot. The height of the building, lot coverage, setbacks from property lines, separations from specific uses. For example, tobacco product shops, that's in the zoning code, a certain distance from another one, and it's a straight line, not necessarily walking or whatnot. Design standards, off-street parking. We don't have parking minimums anymore, but we do have parking maximums and design standards, and then there are zoning sign standards. So there are some overlay districts in the city. We have the river corridors, and then in that, the floodplain critical area, student housing, which is not in Como, but more in like Union Park, White Bear, Hillcrest Village design requirements, West Grand Avenue, the Tree Preservation District, State Fair parking and vending, which is in this district council area. And then we have 17 special sign districts. Zoning variance, it's only, oh, does someone have a question?
Nope, I was just going to say that you do have share permission if you want, if you
Oh,
have anything that
okay.
you'd like to share.
All right, sorry, I've just been kind of reading this off. Let's
That's
see if I
okay.
can.
So who controls the state fair parking and vending overlay district?
So DSI would regulate that. The vending permits are issued by DSI zoning. So we do have people coming in already to obtain those. And then the parking district's a little bit more hands-off, to be honest. If there are complaints, it can go to the 8989, and then we would triage it. Let's see here. Sorry, I'm just trying to pull this up here. I have to, sorry, I'm used to Teams, so I'm not used to Zoom here. Here we go. All right, can you see the slide, hopefully, with zoning variances?
Yep, that looks good.
Okay. Strange, it won't let me advance it. Oh, here we go. All right, so those are the overlays. A zoning variance is needed if the development standards can't be met. For example, like a side yard setback. If you're only proposing 6 feet and that requirement is 8 feet. Unfortunately, zoning variances cannot be granted for a use. So they're supposed to be like an area variance. So someone could not obtain a zoning variance to allow like a bar in a residential zoning district. They could try to rezone the property if they wanted to accomplish that. Although spot zoning is not allowed, so if it's all residential around it, most likely rezoning would not be prudent or allowed. The BZA reviews most zoning variances, although the Planning Commission does review zoning variances if it's if there's like a conditional use permit, you can apply for a zoning variance along with that. And then the decisions made by the BZA can be appealed to the City Council within 10 days. And then the City Council would be looking for errors in fact finding or procedure, and I would forward all the documents over to the City Council. And then we can, you know, the 10 days, the hearing, we can schedule that farther out as long as it's before the 60 days. So the main thing for zoning variances, and initially when this was scheduled, I think that I was told to talk kind of about having a successful application. And to me, setting yourself up for a so staff are supposed to remain neutral, so I can't guarantee anything because ultimately the Board of Zoning Appeals makes the decision. But it does help your application if you submit a complete application and convey why you're having difficulty with the property and why a variance is necessary. And there are 6 findings that need to be found true for zoning variances, and there are 5 here. The last one is that you're not permitting a use that's not permitted on the property. So the first one, that the variance is in harmony with the general purposes and intent of the zoning code. Second one, consistent with the comprehensive plan, that you have practical difficulties and circumstances unique to the property, and then not altering the essential character. And this kind of ties back to state law. If you go to the League of Minnesota Cities, you can read a little bit about where this language comes from, and they explain it. So I guess I was going to go over the different findings and kind of explain where these come from. In the application, you'll see that we're primarily concerned about the practical difficulties and the circumstances unique to the property, because those 2 items are things that the applicant can best explain. Staff typically can look at the intent of the zoning code, the comprehensive plan, although I'll go through those parts. So the intent of the zoning code is found in 60.103, and maybe it'll come up in Muni code. So it's pretty clear right here. There's a lot of different items, and then each section of the code. So for example, R4, which is a common single family zoning district, the intent of that zone is also here. So it says predominantly low density 1-family dwellings. So that's where you find that. The comprehensive plan, you're probably well aware of this at the district council level, because I think that the PED goes and asks for input. So digging through the comprehensive plan, it's a variance at a house, you'd probably look at page 129 in the housing section. And then I did add the addendums, which obviously you guys would be familiar with this, the District 10 plan. So if I have a variance in your area, I see if anything's relevant in the district council plans. The practical difficulties part is the part that I really want the applicant to expand upon. And that could be, you know, conditions on a lot versus a typical lot, steep slopes, terrain, soil conditions, existing vegetation, where the existing structure is placed. Circumstances unique to the property, they're typically similar to the practical difficulties. And then the essential character aspect, you know, it's supposed to be that it kind of blends in with the neighborhood. You might not be familiar with this, but part of the Board of Zoning Appeals is to review zoning variances for home occupations. I have not seen one of those cases. I've done this for about 2 years, but you can apply for zoning variances for home occupations for handicapped persons if you don't meet the conditions under the home occupation ordinance. Sign variances. I don't know if we're gearing this more towards homeowners, but businesses or even like churches and schools can apply for a sign variance, and there are additional findings that are required, and they're up on the screen here. I just had one for a high school in St. Paul. The amount of signage on the property, I used to review sign permits. It's based upon generally the street frontage, and there's regulations for depending on the type of property it is. So types of variances, now we're kind of getting into that. There are river corridor requirements. We had one recently. This is not a Como specific one, but there's a bunch of bluffs down in Highwood, and a homeowner was just moving to St. Paul and needed to replace their septic system, but there's a regulation that states that no development can take place within 40 feet of a bluff. There's different or additional requirements for that, like obtaining some documentation from an engineer, confirming it's not going to cause problems. Administrative reviews. This isn't a variance, but it's the Board of Zoning Appeals. So let's say someone disagrees with the decision that the zoning administrator makes. They can appeal that to the Board of Zoning Appeals as long as it's done within 10 days of the decision. And then they would explain why they think that the zoning administrator made an error, and then if they disagree with the board's decision, they can appeal that to the city council. And the deadline is typically 3 weeks prior to the hearing date, and that's all on our application packet. If you search zoning variances St. Paul. 1599, I already talked about that, but we have to make decisions within 60 days that the application is made. Otherwise, it's automatically approved if it can be granted. So we're always paying attention to that. And then the typical fees, if it's a single family addition or modification, it's $442, and then the rest are on the screen. Let's see. Oh yeah, the fees, they do studies on the fees to figure out how much it should be. Hearing notices, you may have received one of these if you fell within the area of a zoning variance notice area. It's 350 feet for a major variance, and then 100 feet for a minor variance, which would be, a minor variance is like a single family home modification, and then all the other ones are major variances. And we also send them to the district council, which notifies their constituents. And you know about the district councils, I would hope. Staff,
Hey, David,
what's going on?
is it okay if I ask a question here?
Yes.
Okay, related to what you just talked about, the early notification system. I've asked this in email a couple times and never gotten a response, but our district boundaries actually changed almost 10 years ago, and we like annexed part of what is District 6, North End for South Como. And a lot of the early notification stuff I get from DSI still labels that South Como area as District 6, which causes me to have to like scan the document more thoroughly. I don't know if you have any idea why this is, or if it's possible to update the system a little to reflect this now very old change.
That is a great question. I have not heard of this issue. Yeah, I might need to look into that. So typically it's like a mailing list, and whoever signed up for the notices in certain districts, whatever list they're subscribed to, I don't think it's based upon where they live. It's based upon what list they signed up for. And when I search,
I mean the document itself, like I'll get the Class N license renewal list, and
oh,
it will, like the document itself, the spreadsheet lists all of the South Como things. When I try and sort it by district to save time, I have to look in District 6 as well.
okay, I think I get what you mean. I think that, yes, I think our, it's like our permitting system and licensing, and I think that there might be some, it might be using the old map or something. So I might need to raise that to the higher level folks.
All right, and I just worry that there's also variance requests that I'm not receiving at the office here because they're designated to the wrong district in the system.
Okay, yeah, we can definitely talk about that, because if there's like a specific one that you didn't get, I can look into what happened there. Because that is definitely very important. The ENSs, I send those out typically within 3 days of getting the application. And it's almost better than the paper notice, because I do send a copy of the full application out. So some of the people that are nearby, they might only see the purpose statement, but with the ENS, you get to look at the whole application. So
Right,
yes,
yeah,
we can.
and it's hard to know what I don't yet, so I can't clarify too much on what I haven't done.
Sure, yeah. that is interesting. I think that it must be using an old map or something in our, because it pulls all the ones within a certain area and probably sends them out for like licenses and maybe building permits and whatnot. So that is something that I could raise to them. But for my ENSs, typically I'm just selecting whatever district council and I look it up on a map and it's whoever signed up for that list. But yes, we can
Okay.
raise that. Let's see.
Thank you.
Yep, you're welcome. So what I do before a variance case as the staff member is I look at the property, I look at the application, and then I prepare a staff report to present to the board and recommend either approval or denial, but I'm not making the decision, the board does. Let's see, so it says that application material correspondence, yes, public comment, I give that all to the board members and even talk about it in the staff report. A map of the area, and then a draft resolution based upon the findings that I write up, but the board can disagree with that draft resolution and then come up with their own findings. I email the packet to them so that they can look at it over the weekend. And then the applicant also receives a copy of the staff report with the staff recommendation the last business day before the hearing. And okay, this is geared towards board members, but if they can't make it, so we have 7 board members. One of those is the planning commissioner. And we need 4 board members minimum to have a quorum, and we have to have 4 votes in one way. So if 3 people vote yes to grant a variance and 1 person no, that doesn't work. It has to be 4 minimum. So ideally we'd have 7 showing up for every meeting. We do have a full BZA roster at this time, but we are missing 2 alternates. So if anyone is interested in being an alternate, the mayor's office, they're the ones that put forward candidates to the city council and the city council approves them.
Where
So
does someone go to sign up to be an alternate?
Good question. Let's see. So the mayor's office page is actually ranked higher in the search results, which is kind of funny for the Board of Zoning Appeals. So they have at the bottom, so it's the Board of Zoning Appeals under the mayor's office, committees, boards and commissions on their webpage. And it says apply today. And this is wrong. We have 2 alternate positions and you have to complete an application online. And I've never applied for this, so I'm not exactly sure like how to submit it, but it looks like this green button and go through and submit all your information. And yeah, they want to know we want diverse members from all around the city. So the mayor's office reviews those, but yes, it's on their webpage and it says you can mail it in too. And you can even look at the members, the roster of members on this webpage also under the Board of Zoning Appeals. So you can see who the different members are. That is a good question because we're short 2 alternates right now. We follow the Roberts Rules of Order, and then board members should recuse themselves if they have, sorry, it advanced without me clicking. Recuse themselves if they have a conflict, which I haven't seen that happen very much. I don't think, typically they don't know the applicant and have nothing to do with it. I think it's happened where they had to recuse themselves though. And then this is not really happening much where I get additional correspondence after the packet is sent out, but typically I try to err on the side of giving the board members all information. So as long as it has the person's address, if they send public comment, I usually want to get it to the board so they can take a look at it. And typically I'm trying to cut off at 2 o'clock, but the last business day before, just so I have enough time to get it to the board members and make sure that they can see everything. At the hearing, if you haven't been to a hearing, the chair introduces themselves and speaks about the procedure. They take a look at the minutes and approve those from the last minute or meeting. if there was a resolution, for example, if the board disagrees with my findings and they come up with their own findings, I need to modify the resolution and then show that to them, and then they can see if that the language is correct, and then they can either approve that or amend it. The chair introduces the case and reads the purpose statement, which is the statement that we send out on those notices that you might receive in the mail that says, they're trying to add an addition onto their home. The setback is 6 feet is required. 4 is proposed for variance of 2 feet. We show photos of the site, answer and go through our staff report, the 6 findings, answer any questions that the board may have. And then the chair calls the applicant forward, and then any for or against public comment. And then the applicant can come back up to respond to any of the statements. And we have not had this issue where they've had to restrict public comment. It's not like city council. Typically, lately we haven't had any controversial cases. They close the public hearing, and then the board members discuss the case amongst themselves. And typically someone makes a motion to approve or deny, or lay it over if they need more information. And then this kind of talks about continuances. Typically, we would hold the public comment during the first meeting, and then if they continue it, the public comment period's closed. They can technically open up the public comment period. If the applicant wishes to lay it over, typically we don't need to send out a new notice, because anyone at that meeting, we say this is going to be held at the new date, but if you want to speak now, you can give your public comment now, otherwise show up at the next hearing. We've had that happen. The board can put conditions on the zoning variance. So for example, for like a single family home case, they might, if it's a side setback variance, they might say gutters and downspouts shall be added to direct stormwater runoff away from adjacent properties. Or let's say it's a front yard setback variance for an addition, they might say, the finish on the addition needs to complement the rest of the house. So they make a motion to either approve or deny it, and then they have to state the basis of that motion. And if it aligns with staff, they can say based upon the staff report. If it's different, they need to explain that and come up with what their findings are to support what their decision is. And then they take a roll call. And then, yes, I said they need 4. And then anyone can appeal within 10 days, including the applicant. So anyone affected can appeal the decision within 10 days to city council. And the city council is looking for errors in fact-finding or procedure. So if you see one of these cases in front of the city council, you'll notice that they say, we're just looking for errors in fact-finding or procedure. After that, then once the city council makes the decision, you'd have to take it to district courts. Then it's kind of outside of the city processes at that point. Some typical variances, a garage taller than allowed. At most residential properties, the height limit's 15 feet to the midpoint of the gable or 12 feet to like a flat roof garage. However, if it's an ADU, there's taller height limitations. A sign that's larger than a permitted, front yard parking, which is typically not permitted, converting a single family home to a duplex, accessory structure too close to the side property line. I think that this one was I think this is a real example, no, not one I worked on, but typically you need to have your accessory structures 3 feet from property lines. Splitting a lot, we've had ones like this where maybe it meets the lot area requirement, but not the lot width, or maybe the home that's on there is built too close to the center or something like that. A rear yard setback variance, 25 feet is typical from the alley. So in order to have like an attached garage like this, that would require a zoning variance for the rear setback. And then now this is talking kind of about the typical design standards for single family homes. 15% window door openings on the front, 10% the whole structure. If you have an alley, typically you need to use that unless there's some type of a terrain issue. The attached garage cannot exceed 60% of the front building face if it's in the front, like a what's that called? Tuck under garage. It can't stick out in front of the house, and then the front door or the main door must face the street. needs to be at least 8 feet from the side property lines. And then here are some designs, although I'm a little not sure what the bottom right corner, I'm not sure how this doesn't meet the code. It might be, we used to have a lot or a width requirement. It had to be 22 feet wide. Or maybe there aren't enough windows, 15% window door openings, but the windows in a garage door do count, but the garage door itself does not. But this example on the left, the front door is not within the front third of the structure. Maybe it doesn't meet the window requirement of 15% on the front. So that one's easy to figure out why. This one, the garage sticks out in front, which is not permitted. Here's some examples of homes that would meet the design requirements. This one probably has an alley, so it's not too hard to meet the garage requirements. And then the door is easy to figure out where it is. So in 2012, a zoning amendment was adopted that states that a structure with a non-conforming setback shall not be expanded horizontally or vertically within the setback area. So common zoning variance cases are expansions along property lines where it's a legally non-conforming, the existing structure is legally non-conforming for the setback, but they want to expand, and unfortunately you can't expand along that. There is an exception for like small additions on the rear of a structure. Side setback variances, just what I talked about. So if the existing side setback does not meet the requirement, for example, if it's in like an R3, the 6-foot requirement, and let's say your house is 5, any vertical expansion would require a zoning variance. More examples of that. And then this is, the slideshow kind of went into we had the sidewall articulation requirements that have been significantly changed since the slideshow was created. And
David,
so
I'm gonna stop you. We lost your share screen.
Oh,
just got your computer background. There we
yeah,
go.
it's because the slideshow kind of goes off on other things,
okay,
but I guess I can finish the slideshow. We have photos of the staff here. Yeah, some of the design standards in 14 and 15, which that's not your district. I guess the slideshow leads off with our city website, our zoning website, which that may have changed, zoning code stpaul.gov/code. And then here's our staff, my boss, Yaya Diata, the zoning administrator. I don't think he was I think unfortunately wasn't able to make it. He was gonna try to log in remotely, but his son had an event tonight. And then there I am in the middle, and Matthew Graybar, he is the alternate BZA staff member if I'm away. We have Peter Warner, our legal counsel. I think he's actually retiring within the next few months. And then Maxine Linston, she's the BZA secretary and works on roll call and all those items. So if you have any questions, I'm happy to try to answer.
Yeah, thank you, David. And are you able to stop your screen share now?
Yep.
There we go. Okay, so I think I want to do just like a little bit of a general kind of highlight some things from that presentation that we tend to see in Como Park specifically.
Sure.
So the types of variances that are most common for a homeowner, this is not necessarily a business or an organization, but the most common homeowner variances that we will see requests for are things like property setbacks.
Mm-hmm.
So excellent example is like, I have a 1-car garage and I want to make it a 2-car garage, but that's going to put me, 3 feet from my property line instead of 6 feet from my property line. Can I get a variance? And in a situation like that, the neighbors would be notified and have an opportunity to weigh in on that. It's pretty frequent for us to see neighbors just say, yep, we support it, we're fine. Or if they have concerns, our first stop is always like, talk to the homeowner. Right, try to actually talk to your neighbor and kind of see where some of those disagreements or questions might be. Other variances that we see frequently that aren't necessarily like you're coming too close to my house are those height-related variances that you talked about. So for example, I have a garage and I'm going to build on top of it, or I've got a 1.5 story and I'm going to bump out that dormer the rest of the way or something like that. Those are ones we see pretty frequently. Ones that we see somewhat less frequently are things like lot percentage coverage. And I'm not sure how much, I feel like we saw a couple of those when I started 7 years ago, and we haven't seen many of them recently. And I don't know if that's just because something about the way that DSI has the code, or if we just haven't had those types of buildings. But I think that was, that's something that comes up in that 1 to 4 housing study that we've heard a lot about in land use here, allowing for some additional flexibility on how much of a lot is covered if you're adding things like an ADU to a property. That's an accessory dwelling unit. Things that we will see sometimes with organizations or businesses, we in the past historically have seen things like parking variances. So a really good example of this is several years ago when the old Shalom home was being revamped into what is now Holden House. They had to apply for a parking variance because the number of tenants that they could accommodate with their apartments didn't match the number of parking spaces that they were able to provide. And so, David, could you talk a little bit about some of the changes around those parking variances?
Yes, that's a great thing to bring up. I know in the past, parking variances had taken a lot of time on the Board of Zoning Appeals docket. I think it was around 2020 or 2021 that parking minimums went away in the code, and there was a big process. I think it was Tony Johnson was the main planner that worked on that study. And correct, now I actually, that Shalom home one, I remember that one because I always look through old cases, and yes, that was one that came through. But yeah, we don't necessarily have parking minimums anymore, so you won't see any parking minimum. And that came up a lot. And I've worked here for about 6 years, and whenever a business was changing over, let's say it was retail going to restaurant, or no, those might have been the same. But if it was like a retail to an event center, parking would turn into a huge discussion, and sometimes the business owner, that was the last thing on their mind. And you were correct when you said that some people, they don't even know about the Board of Zoning Appeals until they have an issue, and a lot of people might find out that they need a zoning variance when they come into our counter and find out that their home doesn't meet the current setback or whatnot, or they're trying to build it. Another one is decks. We've had, if it's a second floor deck, it needs to meet all the setbacks and lot coverage requirements. So we've seen ones like that where maybe the homeowner is pulling the permit and then they find out that they need a variance for that. So yes, the parking minimum variances went away, although we do have parking maximums, and I haven't seen a lot of applications to exceed that, but there's been maybe a few. I don't think they've been that successful, but there's one on 7th Street, but the old Burger King near 35E, but I don't know if they're actually trying to obtain and I think they went through a cup, and maybe I'm misspeaking on that, so I better stop. But yes.
Yeah.
Regarding detached garages in the code, there is a section that actually, if it's a detached garage, you can actually, in the code 63501, you can actually try to obtain a maintenance easement, and you wouldn't need a variance if your neighbor agrees to a maintenance easement. So that would just allow you to go onto their property, and it would have to be recorded onto their property and your property. So some people are not comfortable with that, but that's a way, if your neighbor agrees to it, you could potentially set it back less than 3 feet if you're able to obtain a maintenance easement from them.
The only other thing that I wanted to kind of address here is, or the only other type of variance that we see at the district council sometimes are noise variances. And so I just want to be clear that those are not, those are rarely like individual homeowners, unless they're doing something like, I'm hosting a concert in my backyard. Yep. We see that more typically from organizations, businesses, sometimes just event spaces that are, hosting a 5K or something like that. We occasionally see them associated with like a block party for some type of amplified noise. So I'm just trying to think of notifications that people may get. So you may get a variance notification for something like my neighbor's building a new garage or changing their old garage, or their chimney is going to be taller than it's supposed to be, or somebody's hosting a concert in their backyard, and so they're going to have amplified noise, and you're going to get asked about you know, what you think about that variance, or like Gabe's in the Park is getting new speakers for their patio. And so we want you to know that, you know, the decibels might change a little bit. With all of those types of variances, kind of a thing I want to highlight is that it's great from the district council perspective if we can be a first stop for folks before they even get to the point where they're submitting an application. There are a lot, oh, thanks, David. Yes, so noise variances are city council, not DSI. But people always ask you guys to adjudicate noise.
they are DSI, just our licensing staff handle them.
Okay,
so they just go
see.
straight to city council. I know there was one on the west side that actually had quite a bit of public comment, which was surprising recently.
People have ideas about noise.
Yep.
We always would hope, and I say we, like, I just want to be clear that I'm a geologist. Like, I don't know anything about this stuff, except that I've been on land use for many years at Shevik. You know, it's kind of our long-term resource for these types of things. And if somebody is planning any kind of home remodel or addition or anything like that, the district councils can be a great first stop before those applications are even submitted, to help people understand what might need a variance and what that process would look like. For us, because our meeting schedules are monthly at this point in time, it is somewhat common that a DSI might get an application for a variance, and the district council doesn't have a meeting before that time period for comment is up. And so we really like to try to work with homeowners to time it such that we can help with that process, and that we can kind of be a collection place for any kind of comments that folks have. The most common comments that we get when somebody applies for a variance in the neighborhood is neighbors saying, yes, they talked to us about this. We like it. We're fine with it. And the more that people talk about it ahead of time, the more common it is that that's the response we get, rather than something that becomes antagonistic or a struggle going forward. So I want to pause here and kind of just ask if there are like other questions out there, either for David or specific to like a particular variance or a specific code or policy for the city. Okay, so given that we've kind of really been focusing on, you know, home ownership, Gordon, it sounded like you had some questions about like street signage and street parking, which I know is not necessarily, you know, DSIs, that's maybe more zoning. But I think as long as we've got you here, David, it's probably worth it to just see if any of Gordon's questions are things that you could either direct us to resources or answer off the top of your head.
That would be my preference, to get directed to another place of contact. I welcome the opportunity to speak with you and become a friend of your organization. But since Back to the 50s has been in operation, we spend many hours and lots of money putting up no parking signs, which say no parking from 8 a.m. to 11 p.m. During the Back to the 50s. And that makes good sense to us. We continue to do it. I guess we've been at it for 30 years or so. But I've been tasked with the idea of, since we don't have any institutional memory of how that got started, what the desires are, what are the desires of Sub-District 1? What do they want in terms of keeping 10,000 street rods off their streets in the middle of the night or during the day or whatnot? To say nothing of the of spectators who want to park all over the place. So we're putting up signs that seem to make sense to us, but every once in a while we are accosted by the residents. So why are you putting up these signs? And of course, we just say, well, we were told to. And so finding out who said we were told to, what do the residents really want? What are their desires when 10,000 cars parade into St. Paul, and all the spectators want to take a look at them all at once, and then where do they park? In their area. So it's a dialogue that is probably not appropriate to have in your meeting time. I'm infringing on your time, really. I would rather have a point of contact that I can generate either telephone, in person, email, a dialogue to find out what was the genesis of this requirement and what really does Subdistrict 1 want out of Minnesota Street Rod Association. We're here to serve. We don't want folks on the other side of Snelling mad at us. So we'll do anything in our power to establish and maintain a good relationship. So a point of contact is really what I'd like.
Yeah, thanks, Gordon. And that sounds to me like, you know, we have an overlay district for the state fair that allows for, you know, special parking or yard parking. And I know that over the years, that is something we have talked about related to Back to the 50s, especially as that event gets larger and more popular on an annual basis. And so David, if you've got some place that you think would be a good place to start, you know, Gordon, we'd be happy to help you with that.
If you'll excuse me for just a moment, apparently we make a blind phone call each year about a month in advance to Public Works, Department of Public Works, from who apparently is operating off a long time requirement, and they issue a permit to us to put up these signs during that phone call. So it's not a difficult thing to do, but I just wanted you to know that St. Paul Public Works is where we get the permit.
Yep, if I'm supposed to be answering that, unfortunately, I'm not familiar with this specific practice, but Public Works, that you probably end up in the right-of-way permitting office, and there's got to be someone there that might know more about this. If you're getting the permit, obviously if they've been issuing it, they've been okay with it. So there must be something over there. Unfortunately, I'm not sure. I think that just reaching out to the right-of-way office, make an inquiry, and then see if, like, do you have someone that can speak to me about this policy? Sorry.
Oh, my real preference would be to find out what Subdistrict 1 wants before I start talking to us.
Yeah, I hear you, Gordon. Let me ask you this: and I'm not, like, I don't hold you to this. This is just a conversation. Is this the type of thing where the Hot Rod Association or Street Rod?
Street Rod Association.
Street Rod. Okay, I want to make sure I had the right one. Street Rod Association. And is this the type of thing where this feels like an archaic practice that doesn't necessarily need to continue in the future, and you want to kind of, if that's something that can be left in the past, you'd like to leave it in the past? Or is that the type of thing where you would like to expand the no parking?
Well, that's not our call, really. If we were to make the call all by ourselves and not be interested in anybody else's desires, we wouldn't do it.
Okay.
Because we spend an awful lot of money buying almost 300 signs and spend an awful lot of time and a lot of people putting these signs up and then taking them down. So, but it's not our call. It's the call of the people who live in Subdistrict 1. And that's really where I like to start. They apparently started it 30, 40, 50 years ago. We've been at this. Next year, 2024, will be our 50th year doing this show. Yeah. We're now up to 12,000 registrants. That draws an awful lot of spectators. Mm-hmm. So we just want to know if District 1, if we're meeting their requirements. Do they have more requirements? Do they have less requirements? Some of the populace, some of the residents in District 1 don't like those signs because it applies to them too. They can't park there when those signs are up. Yeah. Others apparently are very, very happy with it. In fact, on Hoyt, on the north side of Hoyt Avenue, between Arona and Snelling, the city of St. Paul has put up permanent signs that say no parking during the state fair or back to the 50s. Yeah. And there's so we'd like to know, did the people living on Hoyt ask for that? Did St. Paul do it on their own? What's the genesis of those three signs?
Yeah, And that's a good question. The north side of Hoyt between those streets is Falcon Heights. So they get to kind of do their own thing rather than City of St. Paul. But when so just as a starting place, like first I'd like to make sure that we have your contact information so that we can kind of try to help you get some feedback on this. And just off the top of my head, I would tell you that we do have a community event specifically in Subdistrict 1 that collects from that area in October. Shevik, do you know the date for that off the top of your head?
It's October 7th at Tilden Park.
October 7th is our Tilden Park event. And that would be a great opportunity, I think, to have your organization show up. And, you know, you could even put a table up and not just advertise your event, but use it to collect some feedback and to really hear from that specific community, like that little sub-district of District 10, to kind of think about how they're feeling. I know that we, over the years, you know, we talk a ton about the state fair, but we hear more and more about the Back to the 50s event, you know, like I said, as it gets bigger and more popular. And so I think folks are primed for that conversation, especially at the end of the summer season there. So I think that's a great starting place for us. But again, if we can make sure we have your contact information, I think we can help you kind of get connected with some folks there.
How do I get my information to you?
If you have an email address that you like to use, you can just put that right in the chat.
I'll do it.
If you know how to do that, and then Shevik can take that down, and then we can make sure that we get back to you on that.
I have a couple thoughts. Gordon, I don't live in Subdistrict 1. I can't speak on behalf of them. I do know that every year, the 2 years that I've been here, people have reached out during Back to the 50s, either wanting to do lawn parking like they can during the fair, or trying to tattle on their neighbors for doing it without permission. So like, I think that alone tells you that there's going to be people on both sides of this issue. There is a neighbors group that has been organizing around advocacy towards the fair during the fair, and they're very active right now because the fair is starting next week. And they actually have a meeting in person tomorrow night at Northwest Como Rec at 6:30 p.m. I don't know if you have the capacity to show up in person there tomorrow, but I imagine that they don't have much room in their agenda for this topic either, but if your goal is to meet those residents, that might be a good place to do it.
I'm going to give you my email address. Would you send me that information by email? I was unable to copy it all down.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm going to put my email address in the chat too, so you can have that too.
All right. I think we'll just get some contact information back and forth there. And I'll ask at this point if there is any additional questions for David while we've got him here. Otherwise, we're going to set you free, David. Any other questions? Going once, going twice. All right, David, thank you for your time. We really appreciate it.
All right. Thank you for having me.
Yep. Take care.
Take care.
And so Gordon, like I said, you know, we'll get your contact information there. I do think that State Fair Neighbors group, even if, you know, the meeting tomorrow isn't something that you can attend, that is a nice, that group is like some pre-established contact specifically around things like parking in that area right around the fairgrounds. And so that might also just be a nice starting place.
I'll see what I can do about making it. I'll need more information.
Yeah.
But I don't want to take up any more of your time.
No, totally. And we can get that to you.